and welcome back to The Orange Appeal. I'm Mahita.
And I'm Kirti.
Joining us today is Linda Thomas-Brooks, a businesswoman and CEO, media marketing manager throughout multiple nonprofits and corporations. She's an OSU alumni who has dedicated herself to work in media ethics and helping to support the publication of true and factual information. It is safe to say she's made a huge impact in our society. Without further ado, let's get right into the interview. So basically, you've had an expansive career across multimedia marketing, and public relations. What first drew you into the world of communications and that type of business?
Well, I always liked writing, and I always asked a lot of questions. Sometimes I got in trouble for that in school, for being the person who is always asking questions, being curious. And so that led me to being a journalism major when I was at Ohio State, where being a good writer and asking a lot of questions is part of the job. So that was a really good experience for me. And also learning how to synthesize information. Right. So when you ask 50 questions, but you don't put all the answers to all of those in the story, you have to synthesize and think through it. So that's what I loved studying. And then when I got out of school, I was always looking for places where I could deploy those skills in different ways.
But yeah, we actually saw that you were a journalism major, and we were wondering, how do you think that shaped your career, and how do you think, like, throughout your career, you've pulled different aspects of that even today?
Yeah. For sure, it's helpful in business roles. I've been in a lot of business roles. I've run organizations, but I think the skills that I learned there, still resonate through. And if you look at students in a journalism program, many of them become professional journalists, but a lot of them don't. It's actually a really good background for law school, again, because you're learning to synthesize information, summarize things for people, figure out what questions to ask. Part of the getting to the bottom of things is not just looking for answers, but figuring out what are the right questions and how are you going to understand the situation. So those are definitely things that resonated, all the way through my career, especially because the whole ecosystem around communications is changing so much right now. So being able to look for what's new, what's different, and how do you find people who can help explain that to you, it's just a super important part of what I do.
Right, yeah, definitely with what you said. I think students who are unsure of what major they're going into or things like that, journalism is a good way to kind of find that and get multiple outlets and multiple opportunities.
Yeah,
For sure.
definitely. And I also wanted to cover over what you talked about before on how you've been interested in this for a long time since a young age. I was wondering if you had any role models or influences growing up that inspired you to pursue building this career path.
Well, I'm very lucky. I had parents who just let me ask questions, probably repeatedly and all the time. They also were great at not providing all the answers, but just pointing me toward resources. At a library card, I, just went and found things that were interesting or that would, help me find different information or different perspectives. So that was really helpful. I had many, many teachers along the way who were helpful, including especially a journalism teacher in high school. When I was sort of, playing with it, is this something I wanted to pursue? And she gave me a lot of responsibility to do projects in high school. I ended up doing reporting for a local community newspaper in Northwest Ohio. And my bosses there were fantastic. They gave me a lot of responsibility and, let me be a cub reporter and do things like go to city council meetings and report on road projects, and is something probably only the interns want to do. But it was a great experience. And it just showed me all the different ways that the information that I was getting exposed to could be helpful to communities.
Definitely. And I think that I think a lot of that carries over into especially talking about media ethics. And I know that's a lot of what you do. So how do you think even just like those early high school experiences led you to find a passion for talking specifically about media ethics?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just very different now, and part of it is just staying on top of all the changes that have happened in the media environment since then. It was a lot more linear when I was in high school. I wrote for a newspaper, right? The timetables were longer, the deadlines were longer. I wasn't posting city council news to Instagram. I was writing a story and it was a weekly paper, so it came out, a long time later. And now everything is different, and it while that is wonderful because it gives people the information on a much faster basis, it's also a lot more difficult because the person writing it or reporting on it doesn't have the time to do the homework or to get the different points of view or to really study the matter. And so for me, the ethics part comes in how you look at the use of the new technologies, but make sure that the rigor of the reporting and the information is still there.
Do you think that it's like going on a downward trend, like there's gonna be like less rigor in the reporting as time goes on, or do you think that we can potentially not have that and that we can still have that same like raw news and like rigor in reporting?
Well, I think it's been really hard to keep it in the current environment. I think there's a lot of people paying attention to that now. So hopefully it won't be a downward trend. Hopefully people can pay attention to it. I think I think there's two things that are important. Um, One is to understand that there's a difference between everybody's voice being important and everybody's voice being important about everything, right? As a as a human, we're all equal and we should all have some say in the world, but we're not all experts on the same issues, right? When I go to my doctor, my opinion is not worth the same amount that hers is because she went to medical school and I didn't, right? And so a lot of times people want to share their opinion or their thoughts about something, but they're not actually coming from a position of knowledge and expertise. And so it's really dangerous. And as consumers of media, we have to figure out those differences, right? Whose voice do you really want to listen to? And then we also need to understand the economics of the media business, which work on what they call engagement, right? Which is how many people click, comment, put a heart on it, whatever. And the things that drive engagement are often things that just fire people up, whether they're true or not. So the economics of the media environment are tilted toward putting things up there that are inflammatory or that get people wound up, whether they're true or not, right? So everybody has to be a very, very savvy consumer of media and look through and see like what are the person's motives for sharing that and to look at their expertise, right? So what you'll see a lot of credible reporters do is they literally put um, information at the bottom of the story that says who worked on the story. So how many reporters, where were they, where did they come from, what is their expertise? And that's a really important thing that you can look for to make sure you're getting good information.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really important, especially when we're looking into like there's so many new things that are always on our media when we're looking at like Instagram or YouTube. Like it's
Mhm.
everywhere, it's always in our faces. I was wondering like what advice do you have to give to people like us who are still students who want to drive up an engagement rating and want to keep people entertained to our platforms?
Mhm. Well, and I think there's a difference between being engaged in entertaining, content versus hard news, right? And
Mhm.
the problem is that the economics of them are the same, but the intent is not the same, right? So, like, it's super fun to, you know, watch funny videos or see things that are online or hear people's commentary or see what they're wearing or eating or whatever, right? Um, but you can't equate that to thoughtful analysis of actual news, right? So just the way that you probably don't watch, movies or entertainment shows on television the same way you watch news. You have to sort of apply that same filter in social media or wherever you're getting your information and make sure that there's credibility. And if it's funny, great. Like we all want some fun and entertainment. Um, you have to filter that differently from the credible reporting on important topics.
Right. And I think especially for people our age today, not many people our age really read the news. Everyone kind of gets their information from TikTok or Instagram. And I feel like sometimes those lines can like kind of blur between like entertaining and factual. And some people online, especially will um claim to be like an expert at something
Right.
or have certain like rhetoric that pushes something, some kind of view, even though they're not really an expert. So
Right.
how would you advise young viewers to be able to see credible information and information that isn't necessarily biased and is factual?
Yeah. I mean, the hard part is it just means you have to do some extra homework, right? So you have to look at if you're on Instagram, there's a lot of really credible reporters that are on Instagram, right? Or not as many on TikTok, but some for sure, right? So it's really just looking at that source, right? And again, just the way you would in your personal life if you whatever broke your leg, playing sports, and some person out in the field said, "Oh, I think you need surgery," you'd be like, "Yeah, thanks for sharing it with me. I'm going to go to a real doctor now," right? So,
Yeah.
and with news, it's the same. Like, who are the real reporters who have real expertise in this area, or real analysts, or real subject matter experts? And what is their motive for sharing information with you? Again, it's just you have to be sort of a skeptical consumer of media, just the way that you are with any other, product category.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And like that's definitely really important, especially to people who are just like getting onto new topics and they need to learn more about new information. And
Mhm.
so I just had a question to ask about that. And
Mhm.
it's when receiving new information, how can we push to find the real truth on that? And how do you implement that in your work?
Yeah. So first of all, again, it's finding trusted voices. So there's some people who, if they tell me something, I totally believe it because I know either I know that person or I know their company or their organization. I know where they're from. If it's a new voice to me that says something interesting, I'll check it out. But again, do some homework. And there's a number of fact-checking websites, and I can send you guys some links to those if you want to make them available to your listeners, um, to always check. I would say if you read something that gets you so fired up in that instance, like right away you have a visceral reaction, that's when you need to be really careful and put the brakes on because probably it's been constructed in a way to get that reaction out of you. And you need to take a step back and be like, well, wait a minute, let me check this out. Right. And so many things that hit you that way when you check them, you're like, yeah, that's not exactly the full story. We need to take a step back. The other thing to listen for is there's been this push with even credible reporters to make sure they're telling sort of both sides of the story, right? So they'll come on with an expert and say, vaccines are safe, for instance, right? And then they'll have somebody else who says no. But often, a vast majority of the experts will come be on one side of that story. And by putting both sides, they sort of equate it. It makes it seem to a listener like it's 50-50, but a lot of times it's like 95-5, right? So you really, again, have to listen when you're listening to both sides to figure out how many experts, think A is the answer and how many think B is. And is this really an even playing field? Or is somebody just trying to tell me what the opposition perspective is, but it really doesn't have the same credibility?
Right. I've never actually thought about that before, like seeing like the amount of experts on one side versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting, genuinely. This is kind of shifting gears just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen that like in your career, you've worked with both nonprofit organizations and campaigns such as Better Believe It, but you've
Mm-hmm.
also worked with corporations such as General Motors Media Work. And we were wondering, how would you compare your experiences working in like a nonprofit versus working in a corporation? And would you advise young entrepreneurs or business starters to kind of like look into both?
Um, yeah, I think there's great opportunities in both. I mean, for me, I've been very lucky that I've had this career path that has taken me on a lot of different sides. I've worked in a corporate environment. I've worked in ad agencies. I've worked in media companies and media organizations and now nonprofits. I think when I talk to students, they always ask about career path. And what I would say is I didn't have a linear career path. And what's been interesting for me is that some of the jobs I've had when I was a student, I didn't even know those jobs existed. Like I didn't even know. And actually some of the jobs didn't exist when I was a student. The role that I took on at General Motors was a brand new role. They had never done their advertising in that way before. And I went in-house to be part of a brand new business unit that they created. So for me, it's been about just sort of following smart people doing interesting things, and I love doing things that are different. I'm really bad at doing the same thing over and over and over again. So my path has been to go in places where I have these new opportunities. So when I moved from a corporate world into nonprofit, it was that, and it was the two nonprofits I've worked in have been nonprofits that are part of the world that I've been in, so the media world and the communications world. So it felt very at home. And what I tried to do was bring a little bit of that corporate mindset to a nonprofit world. Corporations typically operate much faster and have much much more aggressive business goals. And nonprofits do wonderful work, but sometimes they're a little more slower paced. And so I tried to bring a little bit of that sort of sense of urgency to what my teams were doing in the nonprofit world to make sure that we were having a good impact on our member for our members and within our industry.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, especially what you talked about how you were able to guide students into kind of learning that for themselves. And I had another question that leads into that, and it's you've been recognized with lots of awards like Ad Age Women's to Watch and the AWNY Impact for Mentoring. What advice would you give to young professionals hoping to lead and mentor in their fields?
Well, I've been really lucky that I've been able to mentor people, but I also had great people who helped me. And if and you guys, I know you're in high school now, but Ohio State has this great thing about pay it forward. Pay it forward. You can't always pay it back, but you can pay it forward. So that's very much the mindset, which is that people help me at every stage throughout my career and still help me. So I love being able to to pay that forward to a new generation of people. And I'm also just genuinely interested in how people of all ages, especially young people, see this world that I operate in. The media world, the communications world changes so rapidly. And it's great to get input from all sides on, how are things looking? How are you using things? How is it working for you? So those mentor relationships, even though I'm helping a student, are always also helpful to me, right? Because I'm getting their perspective on things and just learning a lot of cool things. So I think it goes both ways.
That's so cool, first of all. Like, I wanted to ask a little bit about what you said before about like having a linear career path and how your career path wasn't exactly linear.
Mhm.
I know for a lot of, especially like college students, that can kind of be like a stressful time, like, oh, like this is not going the way I wanted to, or oh, like I had this planned out for the next 5 years. Like, I
Mhm.
think what would you say to like college students who feel that way and like kind of like reassuring them about like that your path doesn't have to exactly be linear?
Right. I, of all the people that I know, high school friends, college friends, work friends, that's, I don't know how many people that is, a lot, probably thousands of people. There's maybe two of those people who spent their whole career in one company, sort of working their way through that company. Um, Everybody else sort of pivots because their interests change, because they have a different opportunity, because the company changes, the world changes. And I think, especially with all the AI opportunities that are coming out, it's really going to change how companies are structured and jobs are structured. So I would say rather than focus on understanding your path when you're, 18 years old or 22 years old, I would say go places where you can learn a lot, and absorb everything you can. Say yes to everything people ask you to do. Volunteer for every project, even if it's not something you are comfortable with or know how to do. Stretch yourself, and then when things change or when you have new opportunities, you'll be ready to take those on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the path is going to be really interesting, but it's not going to be the same every day going into the future.
Yeah, and being open-minded about that is pretty important.
And sadly, seeing how our time is coming to an end, I just want to ask one last question.
Yeah.
In your recent interview with FIPP World Congress, it was clear that you have a distinct passion in covering topics like magazines, media marketing. And this passion is something that most definitely can resonate with people, especially students anywhere in the world. So, what advice do you have for students who want to share this passion in the world and educate on a larger scale? And why do you believe this is so important?
I mean, for me, every job I've had has been pretty intense. Partly that's how the job is, but partly that's just how I approached it. So getting to do something I'm passionate about has been a joy, right? You're gonna spend a lot of time doing whatever it is you do in your job. And it doesn't mean that every day is a joy, and it doesn't mean that every project is a joy. Like nobody gets to have fun, 100% of the time. But in the main, if you feel like you're making a contribution and moving something forward that's important to society, that's a really nice advantage. And I think that the media sort of ecosystem in which I operate is the system that provides information about everything to everyone. And so I'm really passionate about making sure that system is functional and ethical and really creates the value that it needs to create, because that's how you're going to do your professional learning. That's how you're going to do your civic learning. That's how you're going to understand when our government is working and when it's not working, all those things that you need to have a long, healthy life and a long, healthy community. So I really want to make sure that the underpinnings of that media environment stay strong.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's so important, especially in building a community and understanding more about how everything today works. That is something that is definitely completely agreeable.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think we're running out of time, so I'm just gonna ask one last question,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted to just ask you what you think, um, how you think kind of like the media is changing, for the future, and like where do you see like the media going in the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging right now because of the things we talked about, because of the pressures that are on it, because of the business model of the media business. And there's a lot of people working really hard on that. There's a lot of people providing new sources to fact check. There's a lot of people looking at new funding models to support journalists. And so I think there's a lot of sort of experiments, if you will, out there in the media world right now. It'll be really interesting to track them and see, what works and what we can make work. I think having people, especially young people, understand the business model of the media world. Like good journalism is not free. Good journalists want to get paid too. So putting some value on that and enabling some economic, you know, systems for that. So all the money that you spend on Starbucks every month, like think about like a little fraction of that supporting the journalism, right? Because there's a lot going on in the world right now that needs visibility and explanation, and we want to have good journalists who do that. So I think what happens in the world is going to be really interesting to follow, and all these new funding models are going to be, um, you know, uh, they won't all be successful, but I think there's a lot of people really trying to make this work right now.
Thank you for sharing that. That'll especially be helpful in our futures.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely use that advice. And we would like to thank you so much for joining us today. This was such an insightful session, and I'm sure our viewers would love to hear more about this later on. And we just wanted to say that this was such a fun experience for us, and we hope
Yeah.
you had fun too.
To our listeners, make sure to follow us on all our socials on TikTok, Spotify, Instagram, and Twitter. We will see you next time. Bye.